Janvi Chitalia, welcome to the ROHFIT LifePod. So nice to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Before we move forward, would you like to tell the audience what is your field of expertise and what's your experience, your background, everything?
Yeah, great. So basically a gut and a functional medicine nutritionist, and it's an exciting place to be in because I think it's almost been like a self-discovery journey where I was practicing nutrition for about 7.5 years,
Right.
and working on like clinical management and lifestyle conditions as well. But I thought that to really find an answer which comes down to the root cause of a problem, I felt like there was more that I needed to do, and I was on the quest to find something that helps give those answers.
Right.
And I think while trying to look for the answers to be able to give to the people who come in and come back to us with a lot of expectations and they want to really see results, I felt like this is the perfect mix of what they needed to really address the issue from a fundamental root cause,
Right.
and not just put a band-aid on the issue and say, okay, these are the only things that you do and the lifestyle practices. So I think this whole journey of self-discovery within to really do and find a purpose for the work that I do, and really be able to give my best and more than my best to the work that I do, I think helped me find gut health and functional medicine. And I think it was more of a satisfaction that I wanted from the work that I did and to make the world a better place. So I think that's how gut health came into the picture.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So before we start, I just want to actually give you an introduction on what the concept of the ROHFIT LifePod is. So ROHFIT is actually an upcoming app, developed by us, my company called Pathfinder, where our whole focus is the wellness journey of an individual. So we believe that everything from knowledge to awareness to actually implementing any wellness issue, like if today, as you said, nutrition is a big issue, especially in a place like India, because our dietary needs and all of those are either really well kept with our home foods and the family's cooking daily, to the point where there's also really fast food and junk food just ravaging the streets, obviously, because Mumbai is known as like a foodie town in itself.
Correct.
So that was an example to actually show that if any point your wellness journey is affected or is plagued by a particular issue that you don't have much knowledge about, we actually get wellness professionals on board, and our goal is to spark, an idea, maybe an awareness about a particular issue that you're maybe trying to solve in your wellness journey. And later on, when the app launches, these courses will be uploaded on the app itself.
Wow.
And they will be actually broken down into a particular lesson by lesson format. So it's a conversation that the audience and us are part of. So it's easily digestible, but also if somebody wants to go back and actually take the necessary information that is coming from the wellness professional, they can use the app for that as well.
That's amazing.
For now, small snippets here and there of this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel soon enough. And the reason why we wanted to call it the ROHFIT LifePod, because it is like a savior in itself, that everybody has a particular wellness journey that they need to, figure out in some point of my life.
Right.
Like as we are going to talk about today, the topic today being autoimmune diseases, and how nutrition plays a big role in that as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think let's start.
Absolutely.
So first of all, I would actually ask you the very base question, which is, what are autoimmune diseases, and does it happen from birth itself? Is it based on a DNA? It can hit at any point in somebody's life, and
All right. So great, and I think it's a lovely initiative that you really are putting forward. I think education and awareness is really, it's a treasure in today's time, and I think people are more and more willing to go that mile to understand more about their health.
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful, aspect that you're looking at, helping them through that journey and help them really find their path, so which I think is great. Coming to autoimmune conditions, I think the most important thing to understand is that autoimmune conditions are primarily very closely linked to your gut health.
Okay.
And primarily when it comes to your gut health, it's about, I'm just going to go a step back and say the gut health is about your entire digestive system, which starts in the mouth, ends in the anus. And you're talking about a an amazing universe that lies within our intestine, or rather a large intestine or colon, which houses this diversity of microbes, which are these bacteria or a microbiome, which really decides a lot of things for us, even in the space of autoimmune predisposition or not.
Right.
Now, these you're looking at more than 80% of good bacteria and 20% bad bacteria living in synergy in our gut. And we want to keep that balance in check, because that is that counterbalance that keeps your body in a homeostatic environment or not.
Right.
Now, more often than not, because of our stress, sleep, bad life choices, or maybe even like erratic eating habits, or whatever you would call it, would probably keep becoming the hammer that breaks that integrity of that wall, or the brick wall of your gut. And eventually, over a period of time, that leads to issues where you start seeing small and steady symptoms which show up before a full autoimmune condition shows up.
Right.
I'm going to break it down a little bit. Let me give you a simple example. We say that our health is literally like, you can compare it to something like a switchboard. Right. Now, when you're talking about a switchboard, what you're really saying is that the first and most primary block of an issue starting in the system starts with something called inflammation. Right. Inflammation is actually very, very important for the body to have a response of inflammation, because it's the body's defense mechanism. But what really goes wrong is, like, say, for example, a child is playing and a child falls down and hurts his or herself. You see, like, after some time, you'll see a little bit of a redness, swelling, probably that comes to the knee when they probably scrape their knee or whatever. And that is the body's way of inflaming it to protect the body from further damage or anything. So that is actually a very, very healthy sign. But over a period of time, due to insults to injury, like I said, with stress, lifestyle habits, and all of these things, you start seeing that people, instead of looking at that switchboard which needs to have an on and off button for inflammation, it actually becomes a chronically on switch on the switchboard of your entire health system. And where you see that inflammation stays high for a very, very long time because of all these constant triggers.
Right.
Now, triggers could, like I said, could be anything at all. And it's very important to understand that your environment and your choices have a huge role to play. And yes, that could switch on a genetic predisposition that you may already have to a particular condition. Like, I may be more, say, predisposed to a rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition. And what happens is that by creating that environment that is not conducive for the body to have a healthy microbial load, the body switches on that switch, which can show me the disposition or symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. And that is because the genetics and the environment both have created a complete, like a marriage to show this kind of a presentation.
Right.
In certain people, they can go through their entire lifetimes without even showing up on an autoimmune condition if they've been able to control their environmental factors as well.
Correct.
So this is the whole understanding that autoimmune conditions don't happen in a day. They could be something that could have happened over years and years in your system, one step at a time, without us even realizing where the underpinnings of the start of this entire cascade is. And primarily, I want everybody to understand that autoimmune conditions are like any other lifestyle condition, where you talk about diabetes, you talk about blood pressure. You don't ever not become like non-diabetic. If you're diabetic, you are diabetic, but you're a well-managed diabetic.
Right.
So in the same way, autoimmune conditions are also about looking at having a condition managed well and controlled through management of symptoms, maybe looking at all the right choices that you can make. But even medication, a lot of medication is available. I'm not saying that you have to take it, but a lot of people need to take it. So that, along with lifestyle changes, food changes, can be the best way to move forward. But that is important to understand, that you may never be able to become, in a space, you'll not find your space where you'll say, okay, I don't have an autoimmune condition altogether. So that's very, very important to understand.
Actually, in fact, I was one of the points that you said, that it ticks off a gene response, if I'm not wrong. So if anybody who, say, does have a bad lifestyle but also is taking care of their nutrition quite well, and one of those things are off balance, as you said, like gut health is 80% good bacteria, 20% bad bacteria. So it usually comes to a point where if any of these aspects are tipped off, do you get the risk of getting the autoimmune disease, or is it the fact that anything trumps the other? Like, if your nutrition is in check, you're less likely, or your lifestyle is a big trump card there, which pushes you more towards the autoimmune disease itself. Correct. So is there any particular trade-off?
I would say really not, because the beauty of this is that we all know that we each one of us have a unique fingerprint, right? No two fingerprints in the world are the same, and it's actually the same for your gut microbiome as well.
Right.
There's no single individual in the world who has the same microbiome as you. So that's also so unique. So that makes that question very difficult to really answer, because even though, yes, there may be some amount of damage control that you can do, or reduce the intensity or the propensity of how the symptoms show up, or if they show up or not, you can't completely be sure which factor is a larger risk for the body than the other.
Correct.
Like for somebody, and again, also it depends that even if I'm taking care of my food, but if my lifestyle is completely like I'm not sleeping at all, I'm not taking care of my emotional health at all, I'm not taking care of my mental health at all, I'm not doing a lot of other things, then that's going to, how much will you be able to kind of keep that balance in check, right? So I think it also depends on those factors, and also depends on each person's tolerance. There is something called a tolerance for each person's, I would say, intolerance, like a food intolerance or a bowel intolerance, or all of these. There is a load for it that you can take. When the body, you kind of keep hitting the wall, like I said, again and again with the hammer, you will probably tip off that load. Yeah, turn it chronic. So knowing where, and unfortunately more often than not, you only realize when it becomes chronic. Because if you were taking care of it while you knew the symptoms were early on showing up in your system, you probably wouldn't have reached that stage in the first place. But most often than not, we've come into a space where we're really not as connected with our bodies, and we're not listening to a lot of conversation that the body's trying to, the cues, the signs that the body's trying to give you all the time. And I think that is where we're able to not really find the balance or alignment in time to avoid the autoimmune presentation.
Correct.
Yeah.
One thing, just want to track back a little bit. You did mention intolerances there in the middle, and it got me back to the conversation that we had before we started rolling, actually, which was the difference between intolerances and allergies, and how, like, we have had it wrong all this while. Is that we've been thinking that if certain food, we are intolerant to certain food, whether it's milk, whether it's wheat, whether it's gluten, whether it's anything, we kind of get them into the allergy category. So before we move forward, can you break it down onto those two aspects?
Yeah. So as far as food intolerances and allergy, I'll first talk about food intolerances, because we were talking about autoimmune conditions. One very important aspect to keep in mind is that any autoimmune condition, normally the predisposition or the largest predisposition or precursor to it would come from having a leaky gut or an intestinal permeability. What a leaky gut and an intestinal permeability primarily is, where, let me just kind of make it a little bit more visual for you, all right? So our digestive system is like a hollow tube. You can actually, we all have done science classes. We all remember from school, we used to see that whole intestinal thing in our stomach and liver and everything. The blood is actually outside, and the system is where you see your digestive system, the food is inside. Now, if you see, as a matter of fact, the food and the blood don't interact with each other directly. It's the food that the cells, break it down, and then the absorption happens from the gut, and then that is sent off to the cells and everything like that, right? Now, what happens when you have a leaky gut syndrome because of food intolerances is that you actually start seeing that because there's something called a tight junctions that we have. Like a gut is a very thick, one cell layer thick wall. And when over a period of time where there has been food, there's been an interaction of the foods that don't do really well with your body, with your immune system constantly, what typically happens is that this really tight, very, very tight wall junction kind of starts to come apart. And the blood outside and the food start interacting with each other, which is the start of the leaky gut. Without which any autoimmune condition largely is not possible. So coming back to the food intolerances, it's very important to understand what you're intolerant to, because anything from maybe even wheat or gluten you're looking at, or maybe even oats, which has a protein called gliadin, or even your dairy. Today we all know that all these foods,
lactose
a lot of people are not. The intolerances levels have gone up like crazy. I mean, I see 20 people a day who call me just for a food intolerance or a food allergy. So the numbers have gone, and the age bracket is anything from 4 to 85. So it's crazy the kind of people who are getting it, right? And so even foods, even people are coming up with intolerance such as nightshades, which are to do with so things like peppers, eggplant, even like tomato, all these things, or even citrus fruits for that matter, or even the cruciferous family, like you're looking at cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, bok choy, all of these. So again, what typically happens is the food intolerance is a IgG mediated response of the immune system, where the
Which
fun
is
part,
like
yeah,
IgG.
IgG, I just say that IgG is good enough to explain, but IgG basically is you could do a food intolerance panel if you really have to, but I think it makes more sense to do it when you're eating all the foods rather than when you're eliminated the foods and then you do it, because
Right.
it's your body's antibody response to a particular food where it doesn't recognize that food as, you know, something that it knows anymore. So what typically happens is that when you have a food intolerance, and you see the kind of presentation, it could be anything from, you could eat, say, I am intolerant to maybe eggplant. The reaction could come in maybe in, say, 6 hours, 8 hours, or even 15 hours, or 24 hours, or 48 hours, or 72 hours.
Right.
And you could kind of wake up on the third day thinking, after eating that meal, that I don't know why today I have a stomach ache. I don't know what is wrong with me. What did I eat today? What did go wrong today? Did I pass a bowel well this morning? But for all you know, it was something you ate 3 days back. So intolerances are very tricky to find out. You know, and they normally do have symptoms such as gastric symptoms like headaches. You'll have stomach ache. There'll be a constipation, maybe a, you know, like a kind of IBS presentation. A lot of gas, bloating. All of these things can happen. While allergies are more related to a IgE mediated response. Both of them are immune responses.
Right.
But the IgE mediated response is more like when you know of kids who used to have like peanut allergy or nut allergy,
Right,
which
right,
is almost like an instant response, which is more to do with your respiratory system. I'm not saying that it can't have any stomach related symptoms as well, but the primary symptoms are like you get a wheeze, or you get a cold, or you get a cough or a runny nose, or you get a constriction in the throat where you feel like you can't breathe.
Right.
And you know, allergies are definitely a little bit more serious, because if somebody has a very serious allergy, they can have an anaphylactic shock where the body can completely just like, it can just stop breathing, right? So it can be really, really hard in some cases too. So most people are aware of allergies. You even get hives, or you get urticarial presentation as well when you eat something like that. So most foods and allergies are like, again, gluten and dairy is very common. There's corn, there's soy, there's nuts, peanuts, there's fish, eggs. Any of these can also give you an allergy response.
Right.
So again, the foods are different and the responses are different. So that is why people should know the difference between an allergy and an intolerance, because more often than not, then you're synonymously using those words. You may do an allergy test. The doctor said, okay, go do an allergy test. And you may do an allergy test and everything comes negative, and you realize that, okay, you know what, I don't have anything. But still, when you eat that particular food, you feel so iffy about it, and you don't have an answer. That could be because you're looking in the wrong direction, and
Right.
it could be an intolerance instead.
Right. I just wanted to also understand that before moving on to the next topic, that if we had to like really simplify it down to certain points, like could you just give some examples for the audience of autoimmune diseases? Like I know that I've heard a few of like psoriasis, eczema, as you mentioned, arthritis is one of them. Just the very most common ones, and what a lot of people maybe in India in particular would be facing. Because I've heard a lot of people post a certain age limit are very base to get like arthritis.
Yeah.
And it's very common, because as far as I've heard, it's very common in the groups around us. So are there any particular specific dietary maybe restrictions or additions that they can do depending on the particular ones that they have? Is there some common ones that maybe even a person who has psoriasis and even a person who has arthritis do? Are there any connections? Like if we really had to simplify it down with like say the 5 most common ones and the dietary, connections to it, how would we do that?
So the 5 most common ones, first of all, there are more than 200 autoimmune conditions. Some of them have not even been, they've been documented, they have been named as autoimmune conditions by the American Autoimmune Association. But again, all in all, a lot of doctors, a lot of people have still not been able to really diagnose when it comes through, because a lot of them are still under research and we're understanding more about those conditions. The common ones, yes, psoriasis is one, rheumatoid arthritis is one, which we see very commonly. There's also a lot of dispute about a lot of conditions, whether they are autoimmune or not. So things like eczema, there is a little bit of dispute, but we see a lot of eczema as well. We also see a dispute in terms of endometriosis, women having a lot of painful periods relating to estrogen dominance, which is also related to autoimmune condition endometriosis. Also fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia has again been disputed as whether it's an autoimmune condition, but a lot of autoimmune signs and presentations are also there, which I see very commonly. Even chronic fatigue syndrome, for that matter, I see a lot of people having chronic fatigue. They just don't feel well, like they feel like they're tired the whole time, right? So that also I've seen. Also, apart from that, the skin-related disorders are the ones which are quite like even lichen planus, bullous pemphigoid. These are very commonly conditions which I see on a day-to-day basis as well.
Are they related to the gut?
All of them are related to the gut. There is absolutely no autoimmune condition which is not related to the gut. I would say Hippocrates said many years back, all disease begins in the gut.
Right.
I think anything from even somebody who's having a frequent cold and cough, just like that, or having a low immunity, starts from the gut. So I think everything has its underpinnings there. Coming back to the question where you said that are there any connections that you could have in terms of food? Most importantly, I think today I would say, I'm not saying that it's a blanket rule, because like I said, again, each case is very specific, but I would think it'll make more sense to definitely avoid gluten and dairy for sure, because
avoid them completely?
Yes. So I'll give you a very simple tip, and I think this is going to be very helpful for everybody also, that elimination means elimination. Now, say for example, when you're eating something maybe for 4-5 days, and then you start eliminating it for another 10 days, and then you say, okay, I've eliminated that food for 10 days, let me eat a small portion back and see. What happens is that the moment you do that, if the immune system is calming down, and the immune system lies in your gut, 75% of your immune system lies in your gut. Like we all remember our biology class where you remember your reproductive system and you remember digestive system. Do you remember where the immune system is? Do you know what it looks like? No, because it is so abstract and it lies in your gut. So the moment when you start eating foods that don't do well with you, you'll instantly see a response where maybe there'll be a slightly mellowed response to what it was when you were actually eating it on a regular basis, but there will still be a response which is not favorable for the gut. So I think it's very important that if you're eliminating any one particular 2 things, you may want to eliminate them for at least a timeline of 2 to 6 weeks to really see a difference, and put probably some water on your immune system and calm your immune system down. Because the moment you do that, it's like you have a complete a battleground is ready for firefighting, which you don't want. Because if you want the immune system to start healing, for the autoimmune condition and the flare-ups to not happen, you need your immune system to calm down. The first most important thing. So you want to eliminate it. The ground rule to understanding how you want to eliminate it, and this is something I tell all the people I work with as well, keep a 3-day dietary record. Write down everything you've eaten. If you can't figure what it is that could be troubling you, and write down all your symptoms just factually. Like, I ate this at 3 o'clock, at 5:30 I had a stomachache. And put that information down. You will be able to find some connections. Your body is always intuitively telling you what you need to hear. It's just that you're not listening to it. So a lot of times you'll be able to find some patterns, because all of these normally show up in pretty well-known patterns. And then you'll be able to catch them red-handed if you really, understand that mechanism and you pay attention to it. So gluten and dairy. Another one that I would definitely recommend is, although may not really be on the list, but sugar, as we know, is really a culprit that I think nobody in the world should have.
Sugar or
any form of sugar, because I feel like mainly even more processed sugar. So I would say right now, even stevia, as a matter of fact, I would say that try, and if you really have to get any form of sugar, let it be from a fruit or maybe a dry fruit. Over having any other form, because a lot of times when you have a leaky gut syndrome, something like stevia will also irritate the gut lining. You never know what irritates it. So sugar, and also apart from that, I would say definitely what you want to avoid is like I mentioned, nightshades, because nightshades are very common. We're understanding more and more about the impact.
Being peppers?
Peppers, all kind of colored peppers, eggplant, tomato. A potato also actually comes in the nightshades, but the commonly used ones, chilies, all of these come in the nightshades. And another one that I would definitely think that you want to avoid is for autoimmune conditions. Definitely, a lot of people do have an issue is with citrus fruits. That really causes a response in the body which is not favorable. Especially like RA people will say, okay, my joints really get caught when I eat something which is citric.
Correct.
So trying to avoid that. So these 5 things I would say, again, like I said, it's not a blanket rule, but most people will find some relief when they do very strictly eliminate these. And if it's not, maybe if you're not looking at citrus fruits and you normally don't eat it, another food that I would very strongly suggest is to avoid oats.
Avoid oats.
Yes, because oats is also, it's got gliadin, which is another form of protein, which is like gluten is another protein that you find in wheat. Gliadin is very high in oats, which can
Right.
also cause a lot of symptoms as well.
Right. So before we move on to the next topic, which I believe is more of an extensive topic, I think we'll be talking about SIBO and
Yeah.
a lot more.
Yeah.
But before that, I just want to take a small detour that because of these dietary restrictions on the long term, which would affect your autoimmune system at an expanse, but any particular alternatives that we can use, like I particularly coming from, I work out a lot. I require my protein sources. At one point, I was very into taking whey protein, and I was very into taking, other protein sources like oats as well.
Yeah.
And it was my daily routine. And it did at point, make me feel uneasy. It did make me feel kind of off. But then the question comes again of people's particular physique goals or
Yeah.
certain aspects. So if we had to just, before moving on to the next point, we had to just simplify it down on the alternatives, like you mentioned about certain proteins affecting your autoimmune response. Are there any alternatives or something like oats, for example?
So, see, I think if not oats, and if you want to look at a pre-workout or something, you can try and look at options that today available. A lot of options and gluten-free options with like millet muesli and things like that,
Right.
which can be used. So I think going back to our basics, our grandfathers and grandmothers used to eat millet for years and years together.
Correct.
And the wheat that they used to eat also was very, very healthy. The wheat they used to eat was 21 chromosomes. The wheat that we get today is 42 chromosomes. So there is actually a complete disparity in the
Is it changes in the molecular structure?
Exactly. So it's very, very important that, so maybe you can go back to eating millets. That's one thing that I would suggest. For protein, my simple recommendation is test what is the level of intolerance that you have with the protein.
Right.
It's not necessarily you're going to be intolerant to like moong and almond milk and chicken and fish and egg and all of it together. There may be something that you don't do as well with, but there are other proteins that you may be able to have. So I think you want to double up on the proteins which give you less kind of intolerance symptoms. Secondly, I also suggest a lot of people that our digestive fire is higher in the first half of the day. I'll come to that when we talk about SIBO and things like that. So try to eat, maybe you want to kind of bulk up a little bit more on your protein in the first half of the day and eat a little lesser as you go along in the second half of the day, where your digestion is much slower and that protein kind of just putrefies and sits in your system, and the next morning you wake up with acid reflux and the next morning you wake up feeling bloated.
Correct.
While you should look your best in the morning, right? So that doesn't happen, and that's because you've eaten something that's not done well with your system. So I think protein, my favorite option for protein, which I tell everybody to have, is the bone broth. I think bone broth is literally wonders. It does help to kind of seal the lining. So I always say, I tell all my clients that it's about like you use an M-seal for your gut. When there's a leaky gut, we all used to use M-seal for the basins, right? We all remember that.
Yeah.
In the same way, the same response, you actually, your glutamine, your bone broth, all of these are amazing to actually heal the lining back. So bone broth is one of my favorites. You can actually get good quality bones. There are also a lot of people today who are making bone broths. But the key is when you're making a bone broth, say for example for protein, it's raw protein. It's very, very good. Can give you a lot of strength as well. But you want to cook it on a slow cooker for about 6 to 7 hours. That's there's a lot of work to be done. So I think if it's tedious to do it, you may want to buy it from outside and you want to figure a right source to get it from.
Correct.
And obviously use maybe a lime or an ACV to really kind of have all the gelatinous products coming out of that as you cook it.
Increasing the absorption rate.
Absolutely. Because you're getting more and more protein into the system. So I think that is one option you can do. And apart from that, I think...
Could you also give like for all the vegetarian watchers, is there a vegetarian option? Because...
So you can make... So that will not be really a bone broth per se, but it's more like or not really a collagen based thing, but it'll be like a collagen builder. So you have like people use like mushrooms and spring onions and all other vegan sauces, also protein put together. Some also use like you use a little bit of like peas, you'll use all
right.
these sources of brown rice, a little bit of that, and then make a collagen builder through that. It may not be the same, like I said, as a bone broth, but it will still help synthesize the collagen that is present already in the system.
Correct.
And use it better for the body than to kind of lead to more production of new synthesis, so that will not happen immediately, but you can try through the vegan sources or the vegetarian sources. At least the processes which are happening will get aided by the collagen builder,
Right.
or the bone broth. So basically collagen and bone broth, a lot of people can't do the bone broth, so they use collagen as a substitute, because they're almost doing the same
The
thing.
collagen supplements.
Yes, so that's also another option you can try.
Moving on to the point that we actually really intrigued us both, which is also like considering research on this podcast, came up across a new term through you, which is SIBO, and the concept of low stomach acid. So in like a very basic way, could you just explain what SIBO and low stomach acid is, and what preconceptions that we've had about how our gut works and what the actual facts are?
Correct. So I think 90% of the people that I know, and I meet, obviously a lot of people who come to me have these issues, but just generally in conversation, I think I've literally heard 90% of the people say that they have acid reflux.
Right.
They wake up in the morning, they have acid reflux. They eat something spicy, they have acid reflux. They drink a lot in the night and they come back home and they're puking, they have acid reflux. So all of these different ways of acid reflux, but I don't think anybody's really tried to understand what it typically means. So coming down to, most gastros, when you go to, and I'm not saying don't go to a doctor when you're not well, or don't try to understand what the doctor is telling you when you're not well. But what I'm trying to say is that typically when you go to a doctor and you have chronic acid reflux, what they will look for is that they will want to do an endoscopy if you don't get better with just basic antacids, PPIs, whatever they give you. And they will want to check for something called H. pylori. H. pylori is a bacteria which is present in all our bodies.
Right.
And it must be there in a certain quantity for the 80-20 balance as well.
Correct.
But when the balance tips off and you have more than what you need of H. pylori, and when it becomes excessive, it also becomes pathogenic for the system, where you'll see like people will see that they have ulcers in the stomach or in the esophageal lining. And that is normally caused by the predisposition of H. pylori bacterial infection. Now, what I'm trying to get at is that and they normally then doctors will say, okay, take antacids, take PPIs, take antibiotics. But what we really look at it from a functional medicine aspect is that in the first place, how did the H. pylori get there and survive? We have an extremely acidic stomach. Okay, and the pH is like really, really strong. So if you put your hand in it, you'll burn your hand, there'll be nothing left. It's as acidic. Your stomach is like a pool of acid. And that is the only area where the acid should be, because any other kind of mucous membrane in the body, say your esophagus or otherwise, cannot handle that kind of acid. So when people say they have acid reflux, they have a lot of burning, they have a lot of discomfort, chest constriction. That's coming from the acid trickling up in an area where it cannot be, or where it's not conducive for that area of the body to manage or handle that acid. So typically what I'm getting to is that H. pylori is something that shows up typically when there is not enough acid. Now, when I'm coming to that, what I'm trying to say is that if there was enough acid, it's like when the lockdown, we all were washing our hands like 100 times a day.
Correct.
Okay, and we have anything that comes into the system, we want to try and keep hygiene. We want to, ensure that we are eating with clean hands. And that's the whole logic of avoiding any kind of microbial, invasion through whatever is on your skin or anywhere else, because microbes are everywhere, even when you can't see them. And the same thing is with the acid, because any food, water, anything that you take in, even the air, everything you take in, it is washed by the acid to ensure that it's like a checkpoint where the body says, okay, hey, any infection that's there that needs to kind of get taken care of in the stomach, and then the food moves forward to the small intestine for a little bit more breakdown and then absorption.
Correct.
So, but if that acid is not enough, an H. pylori can easily gate pass from your stomach and just be there in your system.
Due to having low stomach acid?
Exactly, because there is not enough acid to ensure that it couldn't make that entry further. So that is where the concept of low stomach acid comes in, because that is what we mean by saying that. So when we actually have a lot of antacids, people keep popping pills like that, take laxatives all the time, take Cremafin, I'm not saying that don't take it when you don't really need it, but you will lose the tolerance of the body being able to deal with any symptoms if you keep taking them over a period of time. And this is typically what happens is that when there is a leaky gut or when there is low stomach acid, it is one of the main criteria to look at having a predisposition to SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Now, most of, like I said in the very start, that most of our microbes live in the large intestine or the colon. More than 100 trillion organisms. They all are living in amazing synergy with each other. Parasites, fungi, bacteria, everything live there together. And they create an amazing ecosystem for us. But when over a period of time, because of several things, like there's stress, there is maybe malfunction of the valve of the intestine, small and large intestine, and many other things like food intolerances, what happens is the bacteria, good or bad, whatever they are, they translocate themselves from the large intestine to the small intestine.
Right.
Where they should not be. Small intestine also doesn't house much bacteria. It's primarily the large intestine. And when they find themselves there, it's like you're eating something and you have a fermentation unit that is set up in your small intestine.
Correct.
So the moment you've eaten something, it's like you're making beer in your system all the time. Like you've eaten dals, it'll ferment it. You've eaten sugar, it'll ferment it. And it loves sugar. The bacteria love sugar, especially the bad bacteria love sugar. They proliferate on that. So when you do that and you have the small intestine, which is really compounded with so much bacteria, good or bad, when that kind of fermentation happens, it creates symptoms like burping, belching, a lot of upper stomach bloating. Like you just feel like no matter what you eat, what you do, your stomach just bloats the moment you eat. And a lot of people complain of that kind of a symptom as well. So that comes also from low stomach acid and the potential cause of having something called small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, which often doesn't get diagnosed because people say, okay, it's just acidity, have this medicine, you'll take care of it.
That's the usual diagnosis.
Exactly. So normally so they do give a rifaximin or they do give an antibiotic course to kill the bacteria, but often, a broad spectrum antibiotic will kill all the good bacteria as well, which you don't want. And that is where the whole cycle or the vicious cycle of the issues start, because you do it to kill the bacteria, but you'll end up killing the good ones. So that 80-20 becomes even worse. And then you've got into a soup of gut issues. So typically what you really need to do is obviously find a healthier way of taking care of the small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, which is basically not feeding the bacteria what they like to eat. So the moment you start to eliminate sugars, even pulses they can't tolerate, a lot of foods. So there's something called a low FODMAP plan that people can follow while they have SIBO. Obviously, it needs to be very guided. It's a pretty tough plan to understand. So when they do that and they kind of don't feed, there's a die-off that happens of those bacteria. And that is a whole system or a process that you can use and then build up your acid back so that you have enough of like a, defense or a kind of a guard defense in your system all the time to take care of the food you're eating and ensure you don't have predisposition to infections.
Right. This would be like an extensive topic and more to discuss, and I would love to do like another podcast with you about SIBO and low stomach acid. Just before wrapping that up and moving on to the next bit, I just wanted to know if there were any I know that there won't be any quick fixes to it, but I particularly have lots of gut issues, and it usually comes because either I had certain amounts of foods that did not react well with my gut, or it was maybe not having it at the right time. And it really kind of sends my body off balance. So what I really wanted to know that if in case somebody there undiagnosed would have SIBO or low stomach acid and their usual response is to either pop like an antacid pop, are there the other aspect of it being considering we living in Indian households, we have a lot of natural remedies. There is your soft or fennels, there is your elaichis, there is your spices, and you think that would be like a different way to combat it, or is it that you just have to, because a lot of these gut issues come with pain as well, and it's like the instant pain is what pushes us to maybe pop the antacid and get like a quick fix. But again, as you mentioned, that is causing more harm to your body on the long term. So what would be is natural remedies and Ayurvedic remedies like a way to figure it out, and maybe it's like a more arduous process, but what's your stand in this? Do you think?
Yeah. So, I would say that definitely, I think even if you're taking medication or not, generally, I think using home remedies is a big plus.
Right.
Because there's a lot of things that the herbs can, from the kitchen, can really do for us, moreover, even just eating a regular pill. Now, typically, yes and no for the answer that you said. That, see, some people who've had a chronic issue, again, they may at that point have again a certain level of tolerance with the pill.
The pill.
So, maybe even something like a simple lime shot. Actually, a lime shot is great to calm the system down, but that may put the body into fire for somebody. So I think again it's very, very tricky, subjective to understand what works for whom. But I think definitely trying, or maybe figuring out, when you don't have a really bad episode, trying to figure out what are the home remedies that work well for your digestion is a good way. And don't do it while you're in the midst of a flare and you're trying something new and then you flare up further. But when you're in the peak of acid reflux, don't go and try something new. But you can definitely, soft is a very good option. Sabja is another very good option. You can try sabja seeds, which you can soak for some time, because
basil seeds, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, a lot of people feel like the body's on fire, or they feel a lot of heat at that time in the body. So sabja can help with that as well. Another one that you can definitely try is jeera pani. I think jeera and hing together, warm water can calm down a little bit of it's like anti-emetic. It'll give you a little bit of a less feeling of like nausea and things like that. My favorite one, although this is a very tricky one, is the ginger. Ginger is essentially an amazing prokinetic. A prokinetic basically means that if normally most of these things happen when the food, you've eaten something at 2 o'clock and the food is staying in your stomach till like 4 or 5, and you don't feel hungry because the food hasn't broken down to a puree-like form where it can get digested very well, especially because you've eaten food that is not suited you, or you've eaten food which has caused fermentation and a lot of gas has been built up in the system. So a lot of reasons why. So a ginger shot, like maybe half a teaspoon of ginger, freshly shredded in like maybe say 100 ml water or whatever, as a ginger shot 20 to 30 minutes before your meal. Specifically, if you don't have a lot of like burning issues in the esophagus tract, can actually help move the food forward, and peristalsis may happen more easily. Peristalsis is movement of the food in the stomach in a wave-like kind of a form. That is how the food moves in your system. So it actually helps you feel a lot lighter. It also will make you feel less bloated. So that's really, really good to have as well. But again, if your primary symptom is a lot of burning, then lime and ginger is again something you'll need to kind of take care and see. Another thing you can try and do is you can have aloe vera. If you have an aloe vera extract,
raw aloe vera,
you can have an aloe vera extract. If you have a plant at home, you can remove like a spoonful, like a teaspoonful of aloe vera, put some of it in water, mix it up and make like a puree, and then drink it up, because aloe vera also lines your esophagus tract. For a lot of people who are having a lot of burning, aloe vera is almost like you put aloe vera and it lines your throat. So the food
cooling effect.
Yeah, it has a cooling effect, plus the food that you're eating just slips down because of its texture, because of slimy texture. Also helps to line your gut lining and heal that as well. So aloe vera can be another option that you can try. But you have to, some people are allergic to aloe vera, so you need to check whether you're not. Always do a litmus test of something really, really small first. Test it out. Anything new that you're trying, always tell everybody, try it first in a very small quantity. See if you have any reaction for a day or two. If you don't have anything, you can try and use it more, regularly in your regular plan.
Right.
Yeah.
This is kind of a detour, and this is more of a personal question of mine actually, is that like right now, because our gut is a big managing system of our bodies, like quite at the core of it. So I believe in the start when we were, I think maybe it was off camera, but we also discussed how it affects like your moods, your maybe your mental health, maybe your emotional quotient at that point. And because I personally feel that there are certain foods that I start my day off with and that I maybe have in the middle of the day during lunchtime or pre-lunchtime, that really sets how I feel, how my body feels. And before we actually move on to the heart health bit of it, I actually want to see very minimally how certain foods kind of, maybe I read somewhere about the gut-brain axis, which was just how your synapses in your brain are connected with the digestion system in the body, and how it kind of plays on your daily mood. So maybe just a small snippet about like what do you feel about that?
Yeah,
Is
so
your take on it?
absolutely the gut-brain axis is very, very true. And they say that gut is the second brain,
Right.
which is very true. So you know of people probably who've been terminally ill or who've had, unfortunately, a brain injury, which is that they can't really make it through or they can't really react. They still have them being able to kind of be fed by a Ryle's tube and they can
Right.
still survive. That is because the gut has its own brain. You know, the gut is the second brain in a way to say so. And that is how people make it through years. Otherwise, how would they make it without having any communication with the gut and brain?
Correct.
So we know that there's definitely a connection. The key again is to understand that, like I said, the immune system lies in the gut and also does our neurotransmitters. Our primary neurotransmitters, like so what you're talking about in terms of feeling of happiness or feeling of, anxiety, all of these can also increase or decrease depending on the amount of neurotransmitters you have in the system. The most important one that we all keep hearing more about is serotonin.
Right.
Serotonin is again a happy hormone. 75% of a serotonin is produced in the gut.
In the gut.
And the 50% of dopamine, which is also a happy hormone, is also produced in the gut. So
Right.
when you don't have enough amount of the microbial balance in your gut, you will see that you will not have that much of neurotransmitter production as well. So there's something called the short chain fatty acids which are produced when you eat fiber, and they produce something called the butyric acid, which has a huge role to play in the way the neurotransmitters act up in your system.
Correct.
I'm not going to go into a lot of chemical details.
It's a very extensive
but
topic.
but primarily, if you really want to work on your gut brain axis, you need to work on the diversity of your microbiome, which is to add a lot of different foods which can improve the microbial diversity, give you a lot more, because every food has a different nutrient which can add value to your system.
Right.
So that is very important. Secondly, to ensure that you're having maybe, trying to incorporate in supplement or in overall form, maybe in terms of food, add probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics are the good strains of bacteria, and prebiotics are the food for the good strains of bacteria.
Right.
So you need to add both in synergy as well for the system to continue to be in sync or in alignment, like we said, or the right kind of balance of the gut. And lastly, which we can talk about more when we talk about heart health and stress
Right,
load,
right,
we were
right.
discussing about that, and there was an amazing discussion, is about the vagus nerve.
Right.
The vagus nerve is actually the most important kind of context in this entire thing, which basically joins your communication pathway from the brain to the gut.
Oh.
So if you want to improve that, we'll come to that when we talk more about it, but that has a huge role to play in the way your emotions are as well.
Right.
So that communication needs to be improved as well. So if you do these things, you'll instantly find a difference in the way. And you'll also know, I think that is, speaking out loud, I'd say that everybody should try to really sit down and look at what foods really pull them down. Which you said very correctly. People don't realize that they're in a good mood when they start their day. By afternoon, they're either ravenous, they're
Groggy,
angry, they're like this, hesitating about everything, not feeling confident, not feeling great about themselves, feeling anxious, feeling worried. All of these can happen just by choosing something which is causing instant inflammation in the body.
Right.
Causing a response that the body's gone into an overdrive of an immune overdrive and a kind of a fight and flight response.
Right.
And you can actually avoid them so powerfully by making a choice not to eat that particular food. Just as simple as that.
Correct.
So maybe I think it's very important that each person should try to look for the foods that don't make their gut happy.
Right.
And then figure them out and not try to eat them as often.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Actually kind of answers a lot of my questions as well, because I believe, as you mentioned, there are certain foods that really tick off your immediate either happy or sad response. And I think I'm a big culprit when it comes to coffee. And like usually starting off the day or having it post lunch, and that maybe is a whole extensive topic in itself. But if you had to summarize it in a way, like in a few sentences of I think you mentioned the vagus nerve, which connects your brain and your gut. Like how do you stimulate it, like in a very, if it can be explained in a very basic few sentences, are there any particular things that one can do or an exercise one can do to stimulate the vagus nerve?
So the vagus nerve, like I said, you need to build more resilience load of the vagus nerve. So, it's something like when we talk about stress resilience as well.
Right.
And it's important to build that up slowly and steadily, because that will improve the communication of the gut-brain connection. It's most of the time the gut is what is talking to the brain. There's obviously connection both ways. It's bidirectional. But to improve that, a couple of things that you can do. A lot of people, I mean, these are simpler stuff I'm going to talk about, which people can do on a daily basis. One can be, to definitely meditate. That really helps a lot.
Right.
Second can be to actually have a cold, like hot and cold shower. So it
and
really
cold?
stimulates. Yeah, specifically having more cold showers. If you're doing normally you do have a hot shower, then you can try and do the cold shower. And if you can't like bear it, then you come back to a hot shower. But essentially, a cold showers are amazing to stimulate your vagus nerve, and cold. So that is so as a practice, that's something that I have tried to kind of inculcate as well. That I try to at least do an ice bath once a week.
Once a week.
Yeah, if you can't do more, because I think it really brings down inflammation, gets you a lot of clarity, makes you feel great, makes you look great. So I think, it's a great way to do that as well. Secondly, apart from that, you could also try, and this is when you laugh a lot to the point that you're going to fall off. That also stimulates your vagus nerve.
Right.
So that's really amazing as well. So definitely go watch more comedy shows or have a good time with your family and friends. The other thing that you can do is, which is a little tough to do. So we all started gargling a lot, I think, in the lockdown.
Because
and COVID,
of
everybody
COVID,
was
yeah.
saying, okay. But they say that if you have to stimulate your vagus nerve to a point where it's really stimulated, like you want it to really work well, is to gargle to a point where you feel like your throat is going to burst.
Okay.
Like that level, like you have to really, really gargle.
Okay.
So that really helps to create more neural pathways, helps to really stimulate the vagus nerve. So as loud as you can and as intensely as you can, that really helps as well. And another one that you can do is, a lot of people who do they can't clear the system, they do take help of enemas on a regular basis. They say that also doing a coffee enema, so that has to again be guided and directed. Don't pick it up like that. But again, if you're doing a regular enema, or preferably a coffee enema,
needs to be done under supervision.
Yeah, but if you're doing, a lot of people do enema at home, they have those options. They've been given that by naturopaths, doctors, whatever. So when you're doing that, to hold the muscle till you can't, like when you have enema, if I think anybody's experienced enema, they will understand what I'm saying, that it comes to a point where there's a rush of water coming out of your system. When you actually, it's like infusion of water, and then obviously that whole toxins are trying to come out of the
Flushed
system.
out.
So when that is happening, you want to try to be able to hold as much as you can to a point before the water completely juts out. So really trying to, that also helps to increase your vagus nerve. Yeah, so stimulation. So these are all like different things that you can do. Start small, but I think that's something that you should try and do on an everyday basis, because that's
small lifestyle changes.
Yeah, but they really go a long way in helping your system feel a lot better, and they will help you increase your overall allostatic load, which is your stress load of the body as well. So that should be something that you can try and incorporate. I'm not going to go into details of the vagus nerve, but essentially, I think to keep the balance, that's one, that you need the microbiome to be healthy. But if the communication between the gut and the brain is not healthy, that's also going to cause you a lot of concerns and issues. So just focusing on one aspect of the microbiome, or just focusing on the intestinal permeability, or just focusing on acid is not important. There are various aspects which are important, and improving your vagus nerve stimulation is definitely one of them as well.
Brilliant. I think there were a lot of takeaways in terms of understanding the workings of the vagus nerve in this, and now that we are at the tail end of the podcast, I again want to quickly get into understanding heart health and how big of a role nutrition also plays in heart health, and also physical activity. And since those were one of the things and topics to discuss, if we really had to boil it down on how, shifting more from like the nutrition to the lifestyle bit of it, is that heart obviously being like the main core of us living, breathing, everything. Considering how we fuel the only thing that pumps blood throughout our body, are there very minuscule lifestyle changes, particular physical activity? Because today, I think more in relevancy to the Generation Z's, everybody's out to get their daily workouts in, because they're either chasing a physique goal, or in the era of social media, you really are driven to, you're in the either extreme. You're either really not paying attention to your physical activity, or you're really doing it to a point where it's either not guided properly, which I am guilty of at a certain point in my life. But it is also like people are there are a lot of influencers right now. There are a lot of people during COVID that came up that they were, okay, we would follow this because it worked for them. As very subjective.
Yeah.
So getting back to how physical activity and obviously nutrition as well, because those are the two things that kind of make one's, body structure, frame, everything. If we had to connect that to heart health and bettering heart health on a long term, how would we break it down?
So I think primarily, first of all, again, going back to understanding the system and how it works is, definitely, that the heart is doing its job on a day-to-day basis, and there's no, we don't realize when or how that happens so involuntary in the system. What is important, I think, to understand is that if you want the oxygenation in the blood flow to be good, and that is the most important thing. You need more oxygen in the system. I think a lot of us today, because of the kind of lifestyles we live, we're not breathing correctly. We're not taking in the right kind of, effort to actually breathe well. We breathe very shallow. We don't breathe deeply. A lot of oxygenation. A lot of people today are smoking, shisha, a lot of other things are constantly on the go, vaping. So we're cutting down all our sources of day-to-day times of oxygenation as much as we should, right? And that has a direct impact on your heart health and lung health, because respiratory system and cardiovascular system work together in tandem. They can't work without each other. So essentially what is important, I think, is that when you're working on that system, we look at, when you're looking at your cardiovascular system, we're very, very closely seeing that today a lot of people are having, at a very young age, are having heart issues as well because of the high levels of stress that we're going through. And there's extreme amounts of stress, like not like just small levels of stress. So when you're looking at stress, we also come down to something called the cortisol hormone, which is your stress hormone. And we've now seen more and more that there's a very strong connection of your adrenal gland, which produces cortisol, which is about your kidney, with your heart and other health as well. Because I think the key over here for lifestyle and physical activity would be to again find your set point balance. Going on either extreme of being able to really say, okay, just to look, like having like a flat stomach or looking like you have like very good like six-pack abs and things like that. I think that is great to go after, but you need to understand that while you're doing that, it is about the kind of stress, that physical stress you're also putting on the body. Today, we've actually come to learn more and more that the body also needs as much rest and recovery as much as you put it through any kind of breakdown. So when you're obviously doing muscle weight training and things like that, there's hypertrophy that's happening. There is micro tears that are happening in the muscle, which eventually through repair and raw material there's a hypertrophy of the muscle that happens. You're building endurance, by doing a lot of cardio and other things as well, or kickboxing, a lot of other functionality as well. But what is important to understand is that if you're doing that at the times that you are very, very high on stress, you are actually cutting down the amount that your body can actually recover from that activity by adding another slap of stress on the body. So I think it's very important.
Fuel to the fire.
Exactly, you're adding fuel to the fire constantly, and you're not slowing down at work. You're not slowing down anywhere else. You're still going out and partying. You're still doing 10 other things. But and also adding this, I have to wake up at 6 a.m. and 5:30 to go to the gym, even if I've slept 3 hours that night. No, that doesn't work for your heart. That doesn't work for your respiratory system. So I think really doing a reality check, that rather than getting your sympathetic nervous system, which is very strongly involved in stress, so when you see fight and flight mode is when your sympathetic nervous system is feeling that way. So I'll go back a little bit, that when our ancestors used to talk about being, in the forests and the jungles and living in villages and things where they were always scared that there's going to be like a lion or a tiger or whatever, and they'd run around and they'd have to like really fight for their life and run to have that adrenaline rush for their body to do that. Today our every deadline and meeting and a workout is adrenaline rush. So I think it's very important that we've forgotten how to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest system, and where the body actually learns to be in a recovery mode over just being in a constant fight and flight mode where the body is on horsepower. So I think that really needs to be something where you need to understand that it should be a mix of, even if you're doing, I'm not saying don't do weight training. I love weight training. I've been weight training since I was in school. So I mean, I'm not saying that you don't do that. Be strong, be fit. But I think what I'm trying to say is that try to find the right balance between trying to achieve your physical goal in terms of going hardcore on your workouts and also trying to do whatever you can to have a better recovery.
Right.
So even if it is to do yoga, or even if it is to meditate, or even if it is to do one of a lot of people now today are trying to practice Tai Chi or Qigong, which are amazing options.
Channeling your energy
Absolutely,
patterns.
absolutely.
Right,
You know, and that is really a beautiful way to still pack in a workout which is effective, yet it's going to give you a little bit of best of both the worlds. So I think that is very important. As far as nutrition is concerned, I think I'll just keep it simple that for the heart health, I would think, again, for me, I think everything boils down to inflammation.
Right.
Inflammation starts, I said, it starts in the gut. Today, if you're looking at having even high fried food or high packeted sodium foods and things like that, first they're going to impact your gut, and from there it's going to impact different systems of your body. Inflammation starts in the gut and then eventually becomes systemic. Systemic is that every part of the body is basically oozing inflammation.
Correct.
And it's not like overnight that, you know, you don't have atherosclerosis or whatever overnight. It's years and years of plaque building because of inflammatory deposits in the system. So eventually, I think it's very important to work on the gut in order to ensure, because now they're coming to say, and because tying this back to autoimmune conditions, they are coming to a point where a lot of research, there's nothing conclusive yet, but they're coming to a research where they're saying that atherosclerosis, the process of that happening in the heart, which is one of the major reasons today for coronary heart disease, or, you know, even heart attacks and things like that, they're saying that that process is actually probably, there's an autoimmune underpinning of that as well. So
which stems from inflammation, or is
it
it?
stems from inflammation, but it's they're saying that probably that whole process is going to, you know, like, looks like it's coming as an autoimmune presentation as well. So they're still doing a lot of research. There's not much that is still you know, out there yet, but they're seeing a probable connection between the heart and gut health and this being actually an autoimmune process. And they're saying that if we continue like that the next maybe 10 years or so, autoimmune conditions are going to be the number one reason over heart disease and cancer for mortality in the country.
Right.
So that is why we need to go back to the basics and take care of our gut.
Right. I think that's a big eye opener for like all
Yeah.
of us, in terms of like on like looking at the larger picture, facing your lifestyle, your usual everyday routine, you know, gives more of a boon or becomes more of a curse depending on how you handle it. So, yeah, I think before we wrap up, I just want to boil down and summarize the kind of things that we spoke about. Number one, obviously, the takeaways from these are like, obviously, understand your rest and digest system. We're inculcating small things like meditation and, you know, giving enough time to keep your cortisol levels in check, and whatever we spoke about in terms of understanding of stimulating the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, I believe. Thank you.
Or even the food intolerance
Food
list, or
intolerance
keeping a
list.
3-day journal. Yes.
Right. So all of these in data will be listed down in each lesson and each course. And before we end the podcast, I would just like to ask you if you had any words or any piece of advice that you would like to give the audience that are watching us. Just closing thoughts.
I just think that so this is I'm going to go back to my favorite concept, which I talk about everywhere, is the concept of intuitive eating.
Right.
They say that when we were small and when we were just born, at that time we knew how to sleep, we knew how to poop, we knew how to kind of eat, and that was something that we came without knowing how to, like, be taught to, you know, how to do these things, right?
Didn't
They
come with a manual.
intrinsically were ingrained in our system from the time that we were born. What has happened is, I think a lot of this is, the issues are happening because we're not intuitively eating anymore, especially because I'm talking about nutrition and gut nutrition. I think we already know internally what foods work for us, what don't work for us. And I think it's just that we've kind of become a little bit more deaf to that kind of a understanding of our system, or knowing what our body really can be okay with or not.
Right.
And going back to the roots of really looking at intuitive eating and knowing, trust me, your body is all the time telling you what is good for you, what is not good for you. And if you really tune into your system and align with it completely, find your center, find your balance. I'm not saying don't have all the other, you know, cheat, enjoy, do everything, but finding that perfect balance that you can, or it's nothing like a perfect balance, but closest to the perfect balance that you can. And understanding what your body really intuitively is okay with in terms of food will actually be a turning point for anybody and everybody who's trying that. Because the answers already lie within our system. Our system is extremely intelligent, extremely adaptive. And if you listen to what a system is saying, you will actually be able to follow the right path towards better health.
Brilliant. Janvi Chitalia, it was a treat talking to you and getting to know more about you. I hope the audience has also gotten a well of knowledge through this.
Yeah.
And if you would like to give any of your social media links or any place there where people can actually find you, floor is yours.
Right, so you can reach out to us on Janvi Chitalia Official, which is our Instagram page, and also reach out to us on www.janvichitalia.com. That's our website. You can reach out to us and write your questions there. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I hope you hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you get an update from us every time that we post. And yeah, it was a lovely time talking to you.